Upgrade your shit.
Yo, what's up? This is Coach RG3.
And I'm not a what?
And we're the Upgrade Guys. Welcome to this episode of the Upgrade Guys, or the Upgrade Your Shit podcast. We are happy to have you here again. Today's topic is going to be really cool, really interesting, surrounding some of the thought processes and ideas regarding training as a whole. But as you've seen by the title, well, it worked for me. It's one of those topics that I think is very important within our industry, because people have this idea that because something worked for them, it should work for everybody. And they tend to want to overlay one system or one thing, one tool over the top of training. So this is going to be really cool. I think Nat recently posted a Instagram post which caught a lot of attention with that exact same title, well, it worked for me. And in the slides, he included Lebron James and his squat. So you want to jump into that really quick and explain a little bit about the thought process behind that?
Like you said, a lot of people use anecdotal evidence to be evidence, and that's the only piece of evidence they use. That's dangerous in a lot of ways, but it's also not optimal. If we're thinking about how humans adapt in terms of training, because training is adaptation, there are established things that we recognize: time and attention, specificity, rates of tissue adaptation. There's established principles that we need to pay attention to, and those are the things that should drive our thought process. Because when we say, oh, well, this person did this, so I'm going to do that, and assume that it's going to work for me, we ignore the complexity of the human organism, and we ignore the uniqueness of every human. Everybody is a little bit different, at least, and everybody has a completely different history in terms of their bodies and how they arrived to where they are today. For example, I might have experienced some type of minor trauma in my shoulder or something that adjusted the way I move from that point and never addressed it. And then now I move a certain way, and I have certain preferences for the way I do certain things involving my shoulder, or other things because of my shoulder. And this is not to say like, oh, if you hurt something, then you need to release this or else you'll never be right. It's just saying that we all have these variables that are always moving around that we have to deal with, and we should let that guide us in terms of how we make this human get from point A to point B. When we just look like, oh, LeBron did this exercise, so if I do this exercise this way, I'm going to get what LeBron gets, right. We ignore a lot, and it's just completely false. And when we rely upon anecdotal evidence, it's like, oh, well, my population, I tested this thing and this is what I saw. You tested that population to see if you could prove that to be true, though, and you didn't take into account where they started at. You simply said, did I notice this thing that I think is important when I had you do these things? And that just simply relies on you observing certain things that you find important, and that's not what we should do when we train humans, because we need to know what's important for that human specifically.
So individuality, yeah. When I initially saw that LeBron James squat, or whatever it is they were trying to do with him, like most people, I kind of like cringed, because I'm saying to myself, like, is that your squat? It's kind of like, is this your king? Is this your king? Like, and I think so. There's two things. There's a lot of people who don't know shit about fitness who try to chime in and be like, oh, because he was hurt, and because, it's like a total layman, like, saying, like, he was hurt, that's why he's doing this. But we know that he's been doing that sort of movement well before his actual, injury himself.
That same squat has presented itself in several different videos of his training.
Yeah. And
from different time periods.
Yeah, from different time periods for a long time. And so I think people are getting it wrong in that aspect when they say, like, oh, maybe it's because he was hurt, or maybe it's, and I'm like, no, that's probably not the case. He's been doing that this way for whatever reason for a long time. And from what we see, it's the emphasis of the movement is on his lumbar spine. It's not on, like, people say, oh, well, maybe it's for knee drive and maybe it's for, jumping. Like, he already jumps out of the fucking roof. Like, he does not need continual like emphasis on something that's going to enhance his jumping ability.
You trying to so I think it's important to say this, right? We understand, like, okay, we didn't talk to his trainer.
Right.
We didn't talk to his trainer. We don't know the intention behind that particular thing. Like, maybe he specifically wanted him to hinge at L5 S1 and make that the majority of the movement, and then have that right knee come in on purpose. Like, I'm completely open to the fact that, like, maybe this dude is super smart and there's some reason for having LeBron do that specific way. But when you watch, it appears to me that LeBron doesn't quite have control of those portions, right? Like, I don't believe that he's purposefully tilting his pelvis and like trying to hinge at L5 S1 to for the squat, right?
You don't think that that's what the coach was telling him to do?
I don't think so, because one, like, if you're using a squat, the idea is to develop some like hip and knee drive, right? Like, one, he doesn't flex his knee very much, and that right knee actually like, there's some, like, the
valgus.
knee caves in.
Yeah,
there's
valgus,
right? So, and it looks like that's a strategy that he's like, it's a compensatory strategy as opposed to something that he's actively controlling, because it dips in and out, and he can't control it. And also his neck goes, like, he looks for hyperextension of the hyperextension of the cervical spine as well. The beginning of the movement is him hyperextending his cervical spine, or extending his cervical spine, and then hinging at L5 S1, and then the other things start to move.
Right. If you haven't seen the squat, you should go look it up, because I'm sure it's somewhere on social media where you can see it. So that knee valgus, like, in every iteration of that movement, I've seen it. From the very first time I ever saw it years ago, I was like, oh man, that dip in there. And once again, we don't know what's going on with his body or why it's doing that particular thing, but it is happening, right? And so we can't make a determination based on just looking at that complex movement on what area or what thing he may be lacking, or maybe and when you say lacking, it's funny because people will be like, I mean, he's like a world-class athlete, he's lacking.
He absolutely is.
And I'm like, yes, he's lacking something.
Yeah.
Because he didn't intend to do that. If you do a movement and something happens in that movement that you didn't intend for it to happen, like some anomaly, some sort of out of the characteristic movement, there's something that's not in control. You're not in control of something.
So we're not saying that there's a specific way to have good form when you're squatting, because that's different for everybody, right? What we are saying is this: if LeBron is doing those things, specifically his trainer is having him do those things, I would imagine that he's specifically having him do those things because he wants to create some adaptation. I'm not sure why you would want to create the adaptation of extending your cervical spine, hinging at L5 S1, and loading the bar to your back, and then mimicking what seems to be a squat type motion. And it makes it, to me, it's more about, like, when we think about form or the way things are supposed to look, the ideas of what form should look like come from, like, mostly biomechanics, and like, oh, this is what we think are optimal loading strategies. And there's obviously some value in that, but the bigger thing is, can you control your body parts to do the bigger movement that's being asked of you?
Right.
Because in my mind, like, squats and like deadlifts and bench press, like you say all the time, is like a way to develop, I guess, absolute strength and, or like, display power, right? Depending on how you use those tools. But you need to be able to control your body, your joints to express that, and make that a worthwhile adaptation, right? Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense to me. I mean, it should make sense to our listeners out there as well. We don't.
I feel like we got smart listeners.
All
the people that share, like, they're smart people, bro. So, like,
yeah, I mean, people should be able to fully understand that. But one of the things that I think, like, we're kind of hammering on this particular aspect of it, I think it all just comes back to, are you in control of your stuff? When you go to do the thing that you want to do. And, honestly, we can say like, LeBron is a phenomenal athlete and he has a lot of natural God-given talent, and ability. And as you can see from his young days, like the makeup of his physical structure is just unlike any other human being.
He hit the like Loke said, right? This was, I think it was Loke. He said some like a lot of athletes hit the genetic lottery, right, and they thrive like in spite of it, not because of it.
Right. For those who don't know who Loke is,
Dr. Locatelli Rao out of Pasadena.
Yep. Hold on. So, yeah, I mean, some people just hit the jackpot on a certain thing, and so no matter what you do with that person, like the adaptation, their ability to adapt is just going to be incredible. And LeBron's one of those people. It's not necessarily that, I think if you try to take credit for what a guy like him has achieved, I think that you're borderline snake oil salesman, because like this man would have achieved what he achieved with or without you.
You didn't say Iverson never showed up to practice? Is that true?
I don't know.
I swear I read
We're
that.
talking about practice.
Yeah,
No,
I heard Iverson didn't even show up to all the practices.
I mean, this is regardless of that aspect. Like, we're talking about physical capability, right? Like the physical capacity of this human being to just be able to withstand the number of games, the number of, it to some degree, like you can train people and you can get, things out of it. But at the pinnacle of where LeBron stands as a physical human being, I think one of the things that he would benefit more so than anything is the ability to have more control of his ranges and have more control of his in ranges, which is something he probably doesn't work on at all. And I think
it doesn't appear so.
No, it doesn't appear so. And so, if he were to have that, I think we're looking at this in terms of overall longevity. And I know athletics don't really look at longevity as much. They look at like what are you doing right now? Can you perform right now? And
how can you entertain us right now?
So it's all in the now with regards to most athletics and most professional athletics as well. But that was just one thing that we kind of put in Nat kind of put in his post, where it's like, if it works for that dude, it should work for me. And I think that kind of usually guides our industry a lot. It's like, oh,
unfortunately,
try this workout, do that. And Instagram is full of that shit.
Especially with the advent of Instagram.
Instagram is full of that. Like, do this workout. This is the booty builder workout.
Yeah.
This is
build your glutes in 6 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, your booty's not going to grow like mine. I got a big booty. And a lot of that is genetic,
I'm sorry. Before I forget this, can I insert? So, because Rich is about to finish this up, and it feels like he's about to finish this up. And one thing specifically, Rich is talking about, like controlling the body and whatnot. Our colleague Ben Stadler, who had the chance to train with Sergio Canales, I think that's his name. He's like a famous soccer player.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he'd hurt his ACL. And when he was over here in America, he went to train with LeBron's trainers first. And then he came to train with Ben. And Ben, like, we all subscribe to the same thought process, right? And they did a write-up on that and were saying that it wasn't until Canales got to San Francisco and worked with Ben that he realized and experienced what specific work and what it would take to mitigate his chances of having that reoccurrence of his injury. So, like, you're having everybody trying to fit them in to do this thing, like this is ACL rehab, but Ben didn't do that. Ben looked specifically at what he had, decided specifically from that objective data what was going to affect him most, and thinking about his where he was injured and how to build a buffer against that. But I think that really says a lot, because these people don't have any buy-in to either way. But they were able to see and get the feedback from the athlete himself that he now he understood. Now he had an idea and had context in which to approach, like, what he was doing going forward.
Any place that's a one-stop shop, or just not taking all the data regarding your specific body and decide a path from there, you should run. Like these are the models that a lot of these spaces have. CrossFit is one of those models. There's a lot of spaces,
calisthenics places
that are about that model of like, let's just shove people into the system and see what comes out, and this is the thing, the cream always is going to rise to the top, and that's not necessarily indicative of anything besides your ability to weather the storm. So it's like being a Navy SEAL, right? Like you've read if you've read David Goggins, or you've heard anything about
stay hard, motherfucker.
If you read anything about those that process, it's like they're literally just jamming people through a systematic way of doing things and seeing who can come out the other side.
To me, it's like you're torturing this person, and then mentally, can you survive through that?
Right.
Because we know that's not necessarily a physical thing, right? Your body would do what you can will yourself to do.
Yeah.
It's just like how much of it can you take?
Right. So, oftentimes people will like cite their small percentage, of people who succeed, and I think that kind of ties back into something we also talk about within this context, because it's not just like, I think we've said before that these are universal concepts of ideas, and I think that when we talk about like, saying, well, it worked for this person or it worked for that person, that we have a tendency as humans to do that, throughout everything that we do, right? Like I often get people, like when I make some sort of comment or statement about the systemic racism or systemic issues within our country that affect black and brown people, there's inevitably somebody who will say something like, there's one person that was like, well, look at Kevin Hart. That's a fucking anomaly, right? Like that's not common. That's not norm, right? And that's extraordinary as well for anybody.
Yes.
Not just not just a black person, but for anybody. When you then point a finger to me and say like, oh, look at you, it's like, you don't know what I've gone through, and you don't know what I've had to overcome, or how many times I should have not made it to the position that I'm at right now, or to the space that I'm at right now. I think that when you highlight a very small percentage of people based on some like
anomaly,
some sort of anomaly, you're disregarding the fact that by design the system is still designed to kind of like be a meat
to
grinder.
fuck people of color.
A meat grinder for the most part, right?
That's it.
So
in America, you are a commodity if you're a person of color.
Period. Point blank. And I mean, I think that goes into everything. Like we've mentioned CrossFit already.
So this is my thing about those people who make those comments to you, right? Because they don't want to confront and look at the data the way it is. They have an idea in their mind of what things are, and they want to stay there because they don't want to disturb that, because it disturbs their whole way of life, and they have to look at things in a completely different manner. So if you want to say that racism doesn't exist, if you want to say that everybody is treated equally, you will come with these fucking comments that rely on that type of reasoning. But that reasoning doesn't work, because if you're going to point to one person in a population that does well, then you need to also address all of the people in that population who are not doing well. And if like you said, Kevin Hart's an anomaly, Jay-Z is an anomaly, LeBron is an anomaly, and I would even argue that to some degree they are anomalies not just because they're special, but because somebody has found a way to take their talent and make money off their talent.
Exploit it.
Right?
Right.
And for you to recognize that, and for you to realize that because you have to then either admit one of two things. You have to admit, like, oh, well, racism exists for a reason and is legitimate, or it's like, oh shit, racism really does exist and it's fucked up. You know what I mean? So you don't want to be the person who has to take accountability, right? It's cognitive dissonance to some degree too, right? Because you don't want to disturb that. You want to look at that, but that's just not the way it fucking works.
Right.
It just isn't. And people that are saying those things, then one, they're not being honest. They're not looking at the data. When you say like, oh, well, this many white people were killed by police, this many black people were killed by police, you're ignoring what percentage of the population is white and black,
right.
and how those numbers interact within that.
Right.
So you can't just shoot out those numbers. And furthermore, if you're going to address those things, you need to say, okay, well, the white people that got killed by cops, this is what happened to those cops after.
Right. So we're talking about, once again, small percent, like how a small percentage, like citing that a small percentage of people had success within a system does not validate the system. One of those things that we see that, like I said, we see that in a lot of different fitness spaces, or a lot of different fitness programs and protocols out there. But this is an interesting one because you also see it in diets, right? So if I, people say like, oh, I did the warrior diet, that worked for me, like then I should prescribe that to all my clients.
Paleo,
oh, I should do
keto.
paleo, it works for me, so I should prescribe that to all my people. Another interesting one, because a lot of these diets and ideas and things,
the research around
it also stems out of Eurocentricity.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of it is very Eurocentric in its way, right? So I think a lot of people don't think about the idea of when you say, oh, we need to cut carbohydrates out of our diet. So what's the first thing people cut? They're like, oh, you got to cut rice out of your diet. Well, there's a large population of the world, Africa, Asia being two major parts of the world, that consume rice on a regular basis.
Yep.
And that does not seem to be problematic. So when I, like from my perspective, I've lived in Thailand for almost 6 years. And when these sorts of ideas and things come out, you're working with clients, and you have, Asian clients, Thai clients, Chinese clients, and, you start asking them about their diet and what they're eating and what's going on. And then like you see rice like at every meal, right? And then
every fucking meal,
you start to decide like, oh, well, you should cut rice because that's the problem. No, actually, motherfucker, you should probably cut all the McDonald's and all the snacks and all the extra amenities and shit that's been brought over here.
like the potato chips and
Potato
shit.
chips, all this other manufactured shit that came from the West, right?
Yep.
And that's heavily influenced these societies. It's like, to make a buck, McDonald's shows up, Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, all these spaces
100%.
that did not exist before
Nope.
within those cultures. And
Nope.
that is changing the way in which their body, reacts, coupled with the different way of life. Like the way of life has moved from more of an active way of life in general to a more sedentary way of life, because now people are working in those countries are working more desk jobs, or working more, because as you move from more like agricultural to a more like industrial and then technological, that's the natural progression of things. So it's not their cultural foods that is the problem.
Mm-mm.
It's a combination of other things. And I think we have,
And on that, because I'm sure you've noticed, like in some in Asian countries, like there's also this sort of belief that like the Western stuff is better. So like
Right.
McDonald's or fucking like French fries, this type of shit, right? And then so you couple that with like, oh, this is what's like it's like you say it all the time, the insidiousness of it, right? It's been inserted into the culture for us to think that like, oh, we somehow hold that in a higher esteem.
Yeah.
Beauty standards, like
Yeah.
food, nutrition things. And then you couple that with the information coming from that same place telling you that what your culture does is bad.
Right.
Like carbs are bad,
Yeah.
rice is bad.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so you put those two things together, now you've got a very you got a situation that's not optimal for that person,
Right.
because like you don't know what that person's genetic makeup is. You don't know how that person
Right.
what that person's nutritional needs are, but you're gonna say because I did the study with this group that that this is bad for you, when in reality the shit that you're making money off of and that you brought over here and inserted is the fucking problem, and you're trying to get them to
Right, you're trying to convert them into
exactly.
users of your stuff,
which is the shit that's
consumers of
fucking
your
them up.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like more packaged goods, more like when you go in the grocery store now in Thailand, like who has like shelf space? Hershey, what's the other country? What's the other company's name? Nestle. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Nestle.
What's Doritos' main brand?
All those
All that
companies are now on the shelves in these places.
Yeah.
That stuff did not exist
My
previously.
mom told me when she went back last time, she said she didn't recognize the market because you walk in the market. She said she remember walking in the market and it's just like there's no packaged food, right?
Right.
Hardly any packaged food. She said now you go in there, it's all packaged food, and she has to look for the real food.
It's crazy. It's craziness. You know, and then, you know, you couple it because like a lot of these diets prescribe also like that you cut out fruits and things like that. And when you think about a lot of these societies relied heavily on starchy fruits and things like that. And it's for their particular genetic makeup, which is centuries in the making. Like,
At least.
These fruits, they're like, oh, these fruits are high in sugar, you know, but they've been consuming those fruits for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the fruits, it's the other stuff. It's the stuff that's being brought into the country that's foreign, right? The foreign stuff. And I mean, you can make that argument here as to why, you know, everybody asks like, oh, why does America have such an obesity problem? Well, I think you can make the same argument here. It's like we're a mixture of so many different races and ethnicities that have a long genetic makeup that are different, yet we all consume like,
all of it.
Let's do, you know, because I feel like having Mexican food. Well, you're not Mexican. Well, I feel like having Italian food tonight, and I feel like having, you know, all these different styles of food that have nothing to do with your overall, you know, long-term evolutionary makeup. And so I think, you know, that plays a major role in, I mean, we're not dietitians, we're not, you know, nutritionists and things like that, but
so we're obviously not giving advice. We're just exploring.
We're not giving advice. We're just saying, like, think about these things and think about the insidiousness of it. And I think one of the things that stood out to me, what you said, was like how these things are made to be perceived as better. And a lot of times you use the cost of something to make it that way, right? And so if you were in Thailand, if you're in Thailand, I can eat on the street for like 50 to 100 baht, which, to give you an idea of what that is, that's like $2 to $3. But if I go inside of McDonald's, I'm going to pay like 300 to 500 baht for a meal.
And that food is not better.
And you're talking about $10, right? You're talking about like, and that food is not better for you. The food you buy on the street is like actual real food, like a person
and it tastes
made
better
that
too.
food, you know. So and regardless of your thoughts on, like, you know, how, you know, street vendors and hawker centers and things like that, get a tougher fucking stomach. like
I would say this: if you want to experience culture, like, food is a big part of it, right?
Is.
And in Thailand, the street vendors, that's a large part of that's a big part of the food culture.
Oh yeah.
So I mean.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was all about that life. They filming some shit outside. Look at that. Filming like a car commercial or something. Yeah, I was all about that food life, man. You could buy, you know, fresh mangoes on the street, guavas, like pineapple, sapalot, mamuang.
Don't get me started, bro.
Sapalot, mamuang.
Come on, man. Don't do that shit now. For real? This motherfucker here, man. But no, joking aside, you go to Thailand, you have to hit the street vendors, right? You have to hit the street vendors. You have to hit those little huts on the side in the neighborhoods. Like, that's where it's
harden
at.
Up. Stay hard, motherfucker.
Stay hard, motherfucker.
Yo, it's an experience, man. You know, and like, you know, like I said, you go from being a tourist in a place like that to being a resident, is a totally different like life and experience. And that, not to go too far off on a tangent,
Yeah,
but
where we at? Let's go.
not to go too far off on a tangent.
Yeah,
But I
come
think
back.
this. Well, before we pull back, I think this is an important point because I get I get too many. I had a comment on one of the posts I made last week, like if name a country that's better than America
Oh,
to live
fuck.
in, and I'm like, man,
These
I lived in
motherfuckers.
Thailand for 6 years. Like I don't have any problem. Like I was totally safe. I felt safe. I didn't feel like I was gonna be murdered in the street by police. I didn't feel like I was gonna be murdered by some crazy motherfucker with a gun, that just bought one at the store. I just it didn't happen. It doesn't happen. So don't question how safe I feel in places, because like honestly I feel safer in foreign spaces than I've ever have
But
in
this
the
is
United
how
States.
ignorant people are. Like there have been numerous times where I've spoke to somebody, and they're like, "Oh, so where you from?" I was born in Los Angeles. No, but like, where are you from? I was born at the county hospital in Los Angeles. No, but where are you from? I'm like, you mean what ethnicity am I? They're like, yeah, like, what are you? Well, first of all, I'm human. But since to answer your question and make it less awkward, my family was born in Thailand. Oh, I bet you like being here, don't you? And I'm not shitting you, because like this is literally the way it goes every time. Oh yeah, I bet you how you like it over here? What the fuck's that even mean? Well, I mean, it's a lot better because, you can own guns here and you can own your own business and own your own house, right? I'm like, are you fucking stupid? Like, how fucking stupid are you, you idiot? Have you ever been to Thailand? Well, no. What are you basing this statement off of? Oh, well, I thought in Asia that... Shut the fuck up. This conversation's over. If you don't get the fuck away from me, I'm going to slap the shit out of you. Like, these are real conversations from these, and these are people that are like in their 40s, have jobs, and like are successful by American measures. So if these people are that fucking ignorant, think about that for a second, right? And this is not a one-time thing. This has happened to me over and over
Regular.
and over and over and over again, and it still happens. It still happens today, right? But I've just lost all patience for it, so I shut those stupid motherfuckers down ASAP. Like, it's like, it's just fucking mind-boggling.
It is. And I mean, I think like what we have to start to understand, as we move forward and as we deconstruct all of these thought processes and start to build new thought processes, is a lot of how we operate is, once again, like rooted in a European, well, I shouldn't say rooted, well, rooted in, yes, but also like carries a lens of European understanding and viewpoint of the world. We talked about global and local stuff in a previous podcast, the idea of like global movement versus local movement. I think that ties into that understanding of like a methodology, right? Like if you create a methodology that that does like that has certain outcomes, you're taking a global, like most of the time these methodologies are taking a global approach, right? They're more like, do all of these things and it gets you that, as opposed to taking like a local, specific, individual human approach to it. And I think a lot of us, at least in this industry, who feel some kind of way about doing group stuff, right? Like ethically, you need to do group stuff to like maximize time to some degree, and also be able to serve more people. But being able to do that ethically is kind of challenging, right? Because it to some degree requires you to take a globalized approach to the method, right?
I would argue that if you're doing a traditional group class, like in some way you have to admit that you're underserving that population somehow, or at least one person in that population, right? Because one, like you can't know what everybody's is capable of doing, or like what that person should be doing in the group. Like even if you had a small group of 8, right, and that's not a large amount for a group class, but with 8 people and you have 1 hour, now you how do you ascertain like exactly what's appropriate for these people? Like you don't know what their history is, and even if you did, how would you create a class where you have the program to be appropriate for all these people and still create the adaptations for which you seek? And how are you basing what those adaptations are supposed to be? Like, what's the goal of the class? Because most people, honestly, they just come to a class to get fucking tired,
I just
right?
want to sweat and get tired.
Yeah.
Oh,
but how many people do we get that was like, oh, I was doing berries for a while, and then now my knee hurts. I was at CrossFit. My lower back hurts, and my knee hurts, and my shoulder hurts. But I love CrossFit though.
Fuck berries boot camp, by the way. I mean,
fuck berries.
Like, look, hey. Somebody looking at this, listening to this.
That's a great business. That's a great business model. And like you got good marketing, and like the shit looks cool and all that, but you are not like that's not what I get. Okay, let's say like you do. Let's say you find joy in doing berries. That's great, but you should know what the cost is over time, and you should know what you need to do to like to mitigate that cost, right?
I don't have a whole lot of. I don't have a whole lot of conversation to have about that. Like I said, if anybody's listening and they took offense to that, like it literally does not matter to me. At some point in your life, maybe you'll fully grasp it and understand it. But I mean, I don't.
Why?
Like I don't even.
Why are you doing
it? I don't even like. There's no fight to be had. I'm not. I'm not even like they. Actually, there's no impact on my life whatsoever from like one way or the other based on my statement about berries boot camp. Like it doesn't affect like they're not gonna come out and be like
I don't give a fuck either. I don't give a fuck either. I'm just saying like if you enjoy the shit, then okay, like by all means you enjoy the shit, go do the shit. But like know that there's a cost to everything you do, right? That's all.
And we'll keep seeing these people as, they get hurt and end up right in front of us, and we make them better. So that's keep doing what you're doing.
Good looking out, berries and CrossFit.
Good looking out, berries and CrossFit. We talked about approaching humans as individuals. Like I think, one of the things that like somebody really could have poked holes in that post that you made. They chose. This dumbass chose to like actually pick one slide and look at like your quote unquote assessment, which was actually an old video of you going through like assessment stuff, thought process with me and like going through it. So you weren't actually assessing me.
Yeah.
But they chose to like pick at that and be like, are you using a goniometer? As opposed to, taking maybe a shot at the idea of like, well, this is a system, and you're saying that you can't overlay a one size fits all system over individuals. That sounds hypocritical. They could say like, oh, well, that sounds hypocritical, sure. Right?
Definitely.
But I think
that's because they don't use critical thinking, and they don't understand the thought process.
Right. And actually, it's not a one size fits all system, right? Because
it's not at all.
All we're saying is every human being has a joint or has joints, right? Like that's the fundamental thing that helps us.
That's what allows us to move.
Like
those are the things.
If your joint doesn't move, you can't move.
Yeah.
Right. Like
and exercise is created by movement. Like you do exercises by moving.
What's a frozen shoulder?
A joint that doesn't move.
Can you do overhead presses with a frozen shoulder?
Hell no. Can you do mountain climbers? Can you do push-ups? Can you do bench press?
Are any of those things going to improve the frozen shoulder?
Yeah, if you keep doing it and make the right regression and study the phenomenology of it. I'm joking. I'm fucking joking. God damn.
Keep jamming people into the thing, right? You have to fix the local thing, right? You have to improve the local thing. You have to improve the joint.
So to me, like that, if somebody were to try to poke holes in it using that approach, that tells me two things. One, they're not critically thinking about what I'm saying because they would have asked a different question. 2, they don't understand the thought process, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And if we're talking about FRS, like, let's be honest, I fucking wish to God that the shit that they were saying wasn't true, because then our jobs would be a lot fucking easier. If anything, my job has become more difficult in some ways once I've sort of seen this and I couldn't unsee it. Right?
And some people are just so lazy that
I think that's what it is.
that they're like, oh,
but they
want to
say that I'm intellectually lazy because I didn't say that there's fucking 10 different ways to classify the range of motion. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, for real? Get the fuck out of here with that bullshit.
It's lazy to not want to do this job with a higher level of thought process and higher level of complexity. That's lazy.
That is fucking lazy. It's also unethical.
Laziness is picking your exercises or picking your exercise program off of a freaking Instagram post.
Ooh.
That's lazy.
Ooh.
Lazy is deciding whatever you do at your CrossFit box this week, you're going to do with your personal
clients all week.
Yeah.
That's fucking
That's
lazy.
lazy.
And I've seen that shit in real life.
Lazy is being like, I heard they're doing like glute bridges, and that's what's making like that's what makes booties bigger. So you should do loads and loads of glute bridges, like over and over again, like every workout, every time you do legs, all the time.
Yeah. No. It's like if you're being honest and you understand the thought process, you realize that it's not a one size fits all approach. It's a way to gather information from like like humans just have so many different variables going on that we need to be able to zero in and look at specific things to be more aware of like what change we are or aren't affecting in that one area, as opposed to looking at the whole thing.
Right.
Because then you just how do you pick what to look at in the whole thing, and how do you know exactly what's happening when you're watching the whole thing or having them do like a larger movement, or like trying to get them to like do these movements in the WOD or whatever? Like what was the intention of the movements in the WOD? Who made up the movements in the WOD? Who told you what was good or bad in those movements? Who told you what's dangerous or not for you? And if you're doing that, how do you know that's the case for everybody who experiences that? Because I have a specific person who did CrossFit for years and was told that if he just kept squatting more, that he would be able to squat. He had an anatomical limitation that didn't he literally had an anatomical limitation that didn't allow him to squat the way they were telling him to, and they kept telling him to do that, and he fucked himself up so bad that just to give you some background, this dude sold his company like early on, but before he got out of university, so like he had enough money to do whatever he wanted. He was like overseas for some time with that deal, but he was always doing CrossFit, and they just kept telling him that. He just kept getting more and more hurt and more frustrated, and it took a long time for to slowly work out of that. And like, yo, you just not meant to squat that way, and that's okay, right? And it's not that there's something wrong with you. Like, because you couldn't mimic the thing the way they told you to, they passed the message like, oh, you're doing something wrong. Like, oh, just keep doing it. Or if you would just push through it, you would be. No, that's not fucking it. He literally had an anatomical limitation. And nobody in the full fucking time that he did CrossFit all over the fucking world ever thought about that. Or ever fucking thought to check. And they just kept passing the message to him that it was wrong. And he just fucked himself up. And that shit pisses me the fuck off.
Well, it's pretty... Nat gets
fuck.
Nat gets angry really, really easily. If you guys haven't noticed, that's why he's Luther, and I'm Obama, and I mean, hey, look, like it's strange to me and it's weird to me that people. I remember when I used to live in Thailand and people did CrossFit and they would show up to a facility like, hey, like I'm looking for a space to do my CrossFit. Mm-hmm. Like they just go into this space and do whatever the current WOD is in that space, and there's program like. Training requires programming.
Yeah,
I mean, we work out. We have a coach. We both have a coach,
Yeah.
And she programs for us. She programs progressive loading. She programs different volumes based on where we're at in that program. She programs like
Max effort,
max effort, dynamic effort, like all of that takes thought, and she thinks about like what it is, where we're at, what it is, our specific limitations is. The exercises, a couple exercises may be modified specifically for where our individual deficiencies are, our individual issues are.
Yeah. What do we need to improve?
And we're strong as fuck. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm not here to, like, that's not being arrogant. That's not being like, I think people think I'm bigger than I am on social media too. Cause somebody was like, oh,
Here we go.
You doing 450 pounds is not that much, for
But they have
somebody.
No idea how much you
But
weigh.
you have no idea how much I weigh.
That,
Just
right?
'cause you see an Instagram video, you just seeing me in the video, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know how many times
kind of thick in some of them videos, but bro, cut it out.
You
You
know-
don't be thinking. You shut your ass. Oh, Muffer think I'm big on. Shut up, man.
You know how
Here
many
go. That's
times I show up at a place, like I show up at a place like where I'm to teach a workshop or whatever, and people never seen me before, and they're like looking down at me like, I thought you were,
I thought you were bigger.
I thought you were bigger than this.
Like, yo, you just called me little, bro.
I'm like, nah.
You just called me little?
I'm 5'5", 5'6",
Right.
maybe, somewhere in there. Like,
Yeah.
shit, maybe getting shorter at this point. Like, who knows? But I mean, I think the thing is like a lot of times people's perspectives are always skewed, and so they don't fully understand. And, we've been able to not only overlay our strength components of training, but with our mobility and specific, mobility training, we've been able to kind of navigate and offset and kind of maintain our joints capabilities to the best of our ability, right? Because like when you start loading joints, like things become different.
I say this, like named exercises and patterned exercises, like traditional things we think of as working out, squats, bench press, push-up, pull-ups, those things steal space from your joints.
Yes.
Right? They steal space. And just sitting here, space is being stolen.
Right.
You're continually losing some space. You need to have specific training to take that space back and to mitigate that.
Right.
Literally, as we sit here, entropy is happening and we're losing some joint space. Like, oh, yeah, well, you're not going to stop moving your shoulder in a week if you don't move. But what I'm saying is you're continually losing something, and you need to have a way to gain that back. Because when we're talking about because if we're talking about benching or any type of exercise, what you're doing is you're giving force to tissues to adapt to, and you're giving an input for your aerobic or anaerobic system to deal with, right? And then you're giving your brain these novel experiences under load, which is like these things together are training. So if the physical part of it, the tissue part of it, I don't know why anybody would argue. I'm still trying to figure out why anybody would argue that having access to more tissue to train is a bad idea. I still don't understand the argument against that.
I don't either.
And I think that's largely because they don't present an argument against that. They just present the argument of like, oh, it's too time consuming and it's not worth it.
Funny story about that, or funny bit about that is that like when you start to do joint specific training, and if you have any sort of limitations in how you move or how you operate, you can distinctly, like if you've been doing this long enough, you can distinctly start to feel when you have access to other shit.
Yeah.
Like
it's fucking crazy, right?
It's crazy. It was the most craziest feeling because like, so my bench press is getting back up to the numbers that I was before I had a shoulder setback. But that shoulder setback was clearly because I wasn't doing enough of the stuff that I needed to do to keep that space and steal that space back in my shoulder.
I think we should talk about why, because you had a lot going on at the time, and right?
Right.
So this talks about how globally things affect us at a local level.
I mean, you have family stuff. You have, like, I had a baby on the way. I had like all these different things going on, stealing time away from me. Right. Time is.
And mental space.
Time and all that sort of stuff. So you have to figure out how to fit it in, and there's an adjustment period. Like there's a period of time where you have to adjust to the variables being placed into your life. And so, but the one thing that was still continuing and staying consistent was the training itself, the lifting, the weightlifting aspect of it. And so, my shoulder had never like I had some right shoulder issues in the past. That was clear. My left shoulder, there was always something a little bit funny, but it wasn't ever problematic. But it started to become, as it began to be loaded, because we were progressively loading, that tissue was not ready to take on that volume and that load. And something began to happen in the joint. So it took time stepping back from that. And I think that ties into, we talked about our colleague Hunter,
and Mario,
our colleague colleagues Hunter and Mario, who recently had a piece that they shared because they had worked on some things with them.
Mario had a shitty shoulder.
She had a shoulder issue.
Remember, because at FRA, Chivers used her as an example. Remember,
Yeah.
she had closing angle. Yeah.
And so they worked on that stuff, and I think one of the things that was key to that process was to stop doing the thing that creates the pain.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, like, it was hard. Like, Nat will tell you, like, and everybody who was working with us, like, at the time, we all had something. Our boy Neil, he had something going on where he was having to scale back his squats or deadlifts.
It was his low back because he didn't have adequate external rotation. I mean, I think it was because he didn't have adequate external rotation of his hips.
Right.
I say that because, like, everything else checked out. Right.
And so I remember we scaled all of my training back, like all of it, like stripped away my load, stripped away my ability to bench, like all that stuff. And I was just like, I just hate coming to train now, but I just remember it's like I was just going ham on my shoulder just to try to get back to doing anything, like any form of the thing that I enjoy, just doing all the mobility work. And slowly we started to drive force into the joints by doing some isometric stuff, doing some pure isometrics into
progressive and regressive on that
as well as like into the barbell,
however we could.
Into the barbell that can't move, like creating max effort force into a weight that I could not ever lift off. So just trying to create that full irradiation of the body.
We also employed where we had lighter weight on the bar that Rich could move, and I asked him to slowly ramp into the tension so he could recognize at what point, he was creating that force and then dial it back down. We also did different degrees of abduction for the shoulder. We did we stressed different elbow positions. We found ways to like access as much tissue as possible.
And then my biggest bang for my buck, actually, oddly enough, so in assessment we found that I was restricted in external rotation
on that specific
shoulder. But what we found more so than anything, or what I found more so as a training stimulus, that training my internal rotation has helped tremendously as far as that goes. So we trained external rotation for a while. We worked progressing and driving force into the tissue in that way. But this is the thing. I think what people don't understand is that this is a process, right? You're doing your cars. That is your control, right? Yeah. You're doing some work and driving some force into external rotation, right? And you're doing that for a period of time, and then you're trying to see what the outcome is going to. Does that affect change? Does that create any change? Okay, all right, cool. It didn't. It did. Okay, great. Keep doing it, but let's look at the other ranges of motion. So internal rotation, actually strengthening my end range of internal rotation has done more for this joint than anything, despite the fact that I had internal rotation. It just so happens that, guess what? I think I had a lot of internal rotation of that joint, but no actual ability to generate force
those tissues
And,
hadn't been adapted to force at that length.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think one of the things that we're saying, and like I said, we had to stop the training itself, right? We stopped the actual
took a
thing.
break.
We had to take a break from the actual thing that is creating the issue. And
Can I jump in on?
we use
Oh,
a
wait, no, go
variety
ahead,
of
finish
tools,
finish your thought.
right? We use a variety of tools
Yeah,
to
exactly.
get the outcomes that we were looking for in the body. We just didn't use like a FRS. Because we still want to do a thing, right? A specific skill, which is pressing. So we get into more specific positions and start to do things to bolster that joint.
And is that an FRS technique? No, but it's the thought process that led us to that tool, right?
Right.
That using that way. And I have worked with a lot of like weightlifters or athletes that couldn't do what they wanted to do anymore. And the plan is always this, right? So I look at what the person wants to do. I look at what do those joints have, how do those joints have to accept, what they require, how are they accepting force? And then like, can they go to those positions? If they can, then what do we need to do to have them prepared to accept that much force? And if one doesn't, let's make it do that, and then we can go from there. But it's easy. Like if something hurts on you, when does that hurt? When you do what? Stop doing that for a little bit, or modify the way you're doing it so it doesn't hurt. And then the joints that are involved, check to see if they do what you need them to do there. And if they do, then check, well, what can't those joints do that overall affect how it's dissipating force or accepting energy, or like, letting that, handling what you're giving it. And then when you fix that thing, slowly reintroduce the activity to see if it works.
Right.
And that's an empirical thought process, as opposed to, oh, that hurts, let's leave it alone until it stops,
right.
and not do anything.
Yeah.
Or let me put a box under your foot as you do this thing. Like,
right.
it's you're running away from fixing the thing, right? You're just putting it off. My mom always said, when you do something, do it right the first time, so you don't got to do it again. And what we do is we skip steps and we don't do it right the first time. And then we're like, oh, why does my shit hurt? Because you skipped steps. Because you didn't do it right the first time.
Because you keep running away from it. You keep putting your hands over your eyes and your ears and pretending like it doesn't exist.
And that doesn't make it go away.
I think that was that was kind of like my post this week, where all joints matter.
Yeah. Blinders on.
It's like people keep putting their eyes in there and they're covering their eyes and covering their ears, so that they feel like everything's okay. Like, if I don't see it, if I don't hear it, then it's all okay.
Until that shit smack you in the face.
Right. And when it smacks you in the face, that's the point nobody likes to be at, right?
Yeah.
But
and then you crying about it.
Stop crying, chump. I wanted to say something else, but
you should have said it then.
Bitch.
There you go. Remember, no code switching. Huh? Fuck that shit.
Mask off.
Mask off. Fuck it. Mask off. Maybe we should explain that, because I don't think people really understand what that means.
They don't need that explanation right here.
Oh, we ain't doing that today?
Huh?
Okay, fine. You see, Rich is the boss on the podcast. I'm the boss when it comes to kin stretch class, though. So let motherfuckers know.
Huh? Hey, you could tell them what no, because we talked about it in a previous thing, I think, already.
Did we?
It was like it was a poem by Maya Angelou.
Yeah.
That actually she used a poem that was called Mask. So I think she combined her poem with thought process or something behind this poem, which was interesting. And she talks about how we, like, as clearly, as she's speaking from as Black people, right? But I think this is also relevant for other people as well. Like, we're all kind of wearing this mask in order to like make everybody feel comfortable with who we are as people, whether we be Muslim, whether we be Asian, whether we be Native American, Latino.
Anything that's not white in America.
That's not white, the default culture, quote unquote culture, because I don't think there's a distinct white culture, but the Eurocentricity of it all. Like, we're forced to play within these constructs of this sort of way of being, and in order to make the people around us feel comfortable with us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, what I find it was really interesting is when I go overseas, um, who's most resistant to wanting to behave in the way that's culturally appropriate for that country?
Yeah.
It's usually the European contingent or the white contingent of people who are like,
Yeah.
oh, I can't believe, you know, these Korean people expect me to be like this. Like, it's their goddamn country.
Yeah.
Like,
You're
yes,
goddamn right.
like you should be like however they want you to be.
Did you hear about this? For there's some time in Thailand, people were putting up signs where they were like, please forgive our inability to speak English. If you could please just basically like, yo, you over here in Thailand saying, oh, your English is, you don't speak English well and you mad. Motherfucker, you in Thailand.
Right.
Like, what the fuck?
Like, my English is bad. Like, I shouldn't
That's
have
not
to,
the
I
language
shouldn't-
in that country,
I shouldn't have to
motherfucker.
meet you on your. I shouldn't have to meet you on your terms,
Yeah.
on your space. And I think that's one of the things that we don't do enough of. Like, everywhere I go, I try to like learn a little bit of something so I can like
At least something to
start
communicate.
the communication
Yeah.
process. You know, like if I
'Cause
can
the
say
onus
hello,
is on me, right?
Yeah.
The onus is on us over there,
Yeah.
not the other way around.
exactly. If I can say hello to you, 안녕하세요, 사와디캅, ni hao. Like if I can say something to you, like at least that's a starting point. And let that person give you the opportunity to be like, oh, you know, to appreciate the fact that you had enough respect for them to like speak to them in
Yeah.
their own language, to not
As
come and
opposed to
impose
coming and
your
saying, "Why can't
colonizer
you speak mine?"
attitude. Yeah, imposing your attitudes on them. Like that's
And I think that goes back to what we're talking about, because when you say, oh, well, it worked for me,
right.
you're doing the same thing, right? You're saying, well, this is okay for me. Like, this is what I do. Why can't you be affected in the same way? Or why can't you accept that because I care for it?
Right.
It's not the way it works. Science don't work. Science don't give a fuck about your feelings.
It does not. So anyway, I think there was a lot to chew on that in this bit. The main thing that we wanted to get across here is that like we have to do a better job overall at being more specific, you know, wanting to do the work, wanting to actually you know, do more than just approach things from a broad sort of like sweeping idea.
Throw some shit at the wall, see how well it sticks.
Yeah, like that's not how it works.
It's not.
We have to address things specifically, and I think that's the center line and the through line for everything that we're talking about. You'll keep hearing us here say specificity, specific, because it's important.
The more specific you are, the more that you can weed out the bullshit that doesn't matter. The more specific you are, the more you can realize, like, where are the needle movers in whatever it is that you're working with or dealing with or looking at. When you have too much shit going on, like, that's cool. That all that shit resides in the bubble for which you seek to affect, but you're not gonna affect every different piece in that bubble at the same time. If you can figure out which pieces of that bubble to affect to create greater change in that bubble, then that's a better use. That's the better use of your time. And when we're talking about assessing what a human needs in terms of hierarchy of information, what's important, anecdotal evidence is not more important than established scientific laws. It's not more important than the established information we have for training until some like empirical thing comes out that has falsified that, right? Until then, we have to respect those things. Otherwise, like it's like the Wild West. Like, oh, well, I think this, so we're going to do that. I think that, so we're going to do that. I did this with this person one time, and I really liked it, so we're going to try that. It's fucking crazy.
That's not how it works. That's not how it works. So, thank you all for watching or listening to, depending on how you consume this podcast.
We appreciate the fuck out of you.
We do. We're on YouTube at theupgradeguys.com. You can find us on Instagram at theupgradeguys. And
Facebook.
actually, I said YouTube at theupgradeguys.com.
TheUpgradeGuys.com. The website is TheUpgradeGuys.com. You can find us at The Upgrade Guys on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. You can search for our podcast on Apple and Spotify.
Yep. Or just search for our shit in general. You're just going to see Upgrade Guys.
Google us.
everywhere.
We'll come up.
Yep. We hope you enjoyed this podcast.
Yeah, we do.
And
Holler at one of us if you did. Holler at one of us if you didn't.
yeah, for sure. We probably
We
won't
wanna
care
know.
if you didn't, but but we still appreciate you for getting this far.
We appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening. Take care.
Upgrade your shit. Upgrade your shit.